Well, we've got a bunch of folks in there, so let's go ahead and get this started. So it's interesting. We've been doing these little Pankey pearls, and it's just been a little fun little snippets we've been putting up on Facebook. I hope you all have been catching some of those. And we've gotten this idea with the marketing team down at the Institute to put together some of these little webinars of some of the things that either are constructs that we've taught in the continuum, around the continuum, or some of the other programs that we've done, and to try and do them these nice edible pieces of consumable like this 45, 50-minute program we're going to do tonight. So I don't think I need a lot of introduction. I do some lecturing on sleep for prosomnists. I'll be teaching for a couple of days with everybody down at the sleep course next month. I lecture still on occlusion at University of Detroit. I'm certainly still on the Pankey faculty down there, doing a variety of different things. Do a little consulting on the side with my functional consulting company. And then I lead a group for Smile Source, and I do some training for them as well. And so if you don't know much about Smile Source, email me. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. It's totally off topic for today, other than it's a good way to save a few bucks on your consumable bill, stuff like that. So most of the conversations we have at the Institute, we start with talking about why. And so if I were going to say, why do I want to talk about a predictable model for growth, I might show you this graph. I've used a graph like this, and every once in a while, the American Dental Association updates it. So this is the most recent one I could find from 2019. And first, just look at the green and the blue lines. And what you notice is from left to right, they're just always going up. And those two lines indicate the gross domestic product per capita, the GDP per capita, and then the household income, the average U.S. household income. And you see those vertical gray lines, those are recessions. That's the recession back in 1991, the 2000 dot-com bust, and then we had a rather big one, if you recall, in 2007, 8, 9. So that was a monster. That ended with the market, the Dow Jones down around 6,900, and it's at 23.4 now, so it certainly has done its job in recovering. So what you do see on the blue line, especially, and if you look closely, you can see it a couple of times on the green line, is when there's a recession, there's a dip in household income. When the economy is in the crapper, people just don't make as much money. There's a dip in that income, and this is all adjusted so that it's a fair look at things. Well, then if you take a look at us, that's the maroon line down at the bottom, or the reddish line, or whatever you might say, you notice that it looks very similar to about 2005, where it shows that the average income for a GP dentist has been gradually going up. And you can see where it has those same inflection points when there's a recession. But the last one starts a declining slope, where it changes from a positive slope from left to right to, in 2005, it starts to go onto a declining slope. And it has far from recovered from that. The last 2 years, 15 and 16 on this graph, have dipped up a little bit. 17, I can tell you, I've read is flat. So we've seen a shift in the slope. Same thing's happening for specialists. You'd see that in the yellow line above that. And it started in 2005. I want you to make a note of that. This last decrease in our income as dentists has started before a recession. So it's not a reaction to the recession. It was something else that must have been going on in 2005, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So I want us to be able to be proactive, not always be reactive to things. When something comes along and it's negative or it's bad, the economy goes in the crapper, reimbursements go down. Delta Premier has left, I think, 11 states now. They're going to price themselves out of some of the others. But when those kinds of things happen, what we'd like to see is that we have the opportunity to be proactive and have a plan in place, have a strategy, have tactics, and have things that we were already working on, so that when the sales are set and the wind's blowing great, everything's easy for everybody. But the moment that the winds change, we have to be able to reset our sales. In 2005, what happened is that's the year that more than 50% of all the insurance reimbursement models out there became PPOs. Up until about 2005, it was growing from 30 to 35 to 40 to 45%. And in 2005, the number of insurance companies that were PPOs out there went to 50%. And that tipped the scales so that our reimbursements in the average dental practice out there began to decline, because the discounts were far exceeding the inflationary increase that we were seeing in fees. So in other words, you could have indemnity insurance and be participating with an insurance company, and that was always going to be a challenge. But now the PPOs were lopping another 10 or 15 or sometimes 20 or 25% off of what previously would have been the usual customary reasonable fee. And that caused a decline long before that recession hit in 2007, 8, and 9. So that was something that a lot of people have been reacting to subconsciously. So big is the decline, we're down, if you look back at that slide, about 20% since the high in 2005. And I got to tell you, if I walk into your practice and took 20% away from you tomorrow, you'd shoot me on the way out. If I took 2% a year for 10 or 12 years, like a frog in warm water brought to a boil, you probably wouldn't jump out. And that's what's been happening. So what's important for us is that we have some sort of a strategic plan for how we're going to understand the growth model in our practice, how we can pull on the right levers, drive the right kinds of things, and get the right things to work for us so that it's profitable for us. When I say profitable, I don't just mean money. We're always going to talk about trying to do the kind of dentistry that helps our patients keep their teeth the rest of their lifetime in the best comfort, function, and aesthetics. We want our patients to have the best possible health. But we also want to do dentistry that's very fulfilling for us. It's more fun, the kind of comprehensive care, the low volume, fee for service, relationship-based comprehensive care model that we learned down at the Institute. And so we want that to be resonating for us. And oh, by the way, if we're doing those two things, it's very likely that we'll have a positive result at the cash register, if you will. If we think of ourselves as a business, which shame on us if we should ever do that. But if we think of ourselves as a business, doing the right things for the right reasons should result in a better income level. So I want to be able to talk about those things tonight in the scope that we put it in under a strategic plan, and a strategic plan that is tied to your vision, because your vision should drive what the plan should be for your practice. And then within that plan, you're going to have goals and objectives and things you want to achieve. And as you reach some of those goals and objectives, that's going to give you results. And those results should be things that you can use to help support your vision. And so that if your vision is doing a certain style of dentistry, a certain type of dentistry, certain sets of procedures, working on certain types of patients, you should be able to do that. The problem we have in dentistry is we're not very strong strategic planners. We're not very strong strategic planners in our business, but we're actually very good strategic planners when we're doing treatment planning. Think about it. All good strategic planning starts with a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then you start to put that against your vision and you figure out what strategies and tactics you want to use, what goals and objectives you set in place, just like we do for a patient. We do a complete and thorough examination, interior and exterior to the mouth. We do an inside and outside SWOT analysis, if you will. We talk about setting goals and objectives for the patient and for us in terms of the restorative plan that we have in place. And then we measure things along the way, and we sometimes adjust the plan as it goes along if we need to, but we're always working towards a strategic goal that, let me remind you, is aligned with the vision we have for that patient's care. So we're absolutely, positively excellent at strategic planning for patients' dentistry. And if we can keep that in mind, we can apply that same principle of strategic planning, treatment planning, to strategic planning in our business or our practice. And our practice model is simple, and the goal tonight is very, very simple. I want to talk to you about a very simple strategic plan matrix that you can use, and 3 very, very targeted strategic activities that you can use to grow your practice. And when we talk about income, once again, there's 2 parts to that. There's warm and fuzzy, and then there's how do I pay my bills? I need some cash for that. So it's both behavioral and monetary at the same time. It's important that we have both of those components when we think about our rewards in our practice, that balanced approach to knowing yourself, knowing your patient, knowing your work, and applying your knowledge. Those rewards can't just be money. Money's not enough. We got to have some warm fuzzies. And the warm fuzzies aren't enough because we got to pay our bills. And if you don't believe me, try getting your team in there on a Friday, and when they ask for their checks, tell them, hey, come on in here, group hug, we've changed some lives this week. I don't know how many group hugs you can get away with, but you can probably only get about a week or 2 before they're going to find another job, because they also have to pay their bills. So let's take a look at something that'll help us understand this simple strategic plan that I'm talking about. A number of years ago, I read an article in Harvard Business Review that talked about customer equity models and marketing plans that drove customer equity. And it's kind of a deep article. It's really neat. It's about the banking industry. And what they talked about was a bank that grew their business by not spending as much money on marketing to get new customers, but by instead working on developing very strong retention plans, so that they tried to do things to keep more of their customers, because then they wouldn't have to go out and find as many new customers to grow. Because if they lost 5% of their customers in a year, they'd have to grow 5% just to hold, serve, and break even. So the idea here was if they could work on customer retention, make the banking business stickier, give them loyalty rewards, loyalty points. I fly 90 or 100,000 miles a year now on Delta Airlines, and the loyalty really makes it very unattractive for me to search for lower fares on another airlines because they take such good care of me. So the second thing they started to focus on is, what if we could sell more to our existing customers? So it was a banking business, and the bank has usually different income streams. And so you might have a checking account or a savings account. You might have a home equity line of credit or a mortgage or an investment account with the bank or something like that. Car loan, a number of different ways that you can interact with the bank where they can make money. But they realized that most of their customers were only doing business with them in one of those channels. And so if they could cross-sell them, they could increase the percentage of that customer's wallet. That's what they use the term. I want a higher percentage of that customer's wallet. They're going to spend that money somewhere. I'd rather they spend it with my bank than someone else. And then what they found is they could spend about half their normal budget that they spend on marketing, focus on retention and percentage of wallet. And that bank grew more than they'd ever grown before. And they also got a lot more new customers, even though they weren't really focusing on that, because those really well-retained customers who were also buying into other product lines were so excited about the way their relationship was with the bank, they went out and told other people. So that's conversion of prospects to new customers. So when I read that, I thought to myself, it's like conversion, percentage, and retention, CPR, easy to remember that. And the same concepts or constructs apply for us in dentistry. Retention, well, I can't have somebody come in and get a filling done every 6 months, but they are coming in on a regular basis, maybe every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, to get their periodontal maintenance or their hygiene recare. So there's an aspect of retention of that customer into my patient pool so that I have an opportunity to do business with them. And then when I thought about percentage of wallet, I had to twist it around a little bit, and I thought that's actually case acceptance, so that when a patient comes in, if I only get to do a crown and 2 cleanings a year because I'm insurance driven or they're insurance driven and I can't create a value proposition in their mind, then the challenge is I'm not going to get a chance to do dentistry that's very fulfilling for me. I'm not going to get a chance to help them have the healthiest mouth they can. And I'm certainly, as a result of those two things, not going to make as much money. If I could sell them, wrong word, I know, but if I could sell them on the concept of doing more of the dentistry that they need to have done. See, that's the beauty of it. We don't have to sell something that they don't need. I don't sell a fancier car or a nicer handbag or shoes with red on the bottom or something like that. I just have to help patients want what I know they need. And I know that they'll have a better life for that. And it's about choices. They seem to always have money for stuff that they want, but they hardly ever seem to have the money they need to do the dentistry that they need. And then if I took care of hygiene and had patients coming in regularly and my patients saying yes to more of the dentistry, maybe just like the bank, I'd have a better relationship with them and they'd be more likely to stay and refer their friends. And that's exactly what happens in practices. So this is a matrix that's a very simple strategic planning matrix where you put your hygiene retention, your case acceptance, your new patients, or your CPR, if you will, in reverse on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side across there, you find something, find one behavior, one activity that you want to track, modify, and see how well it does to drive growth in your practice. And so you've got to have something of a benchmark. So for example, in hygiene retention, case acceptance, and new patient flow, you could start with something simple. You could say, well, I'm seeing 5 new patients a month. So my benchmark, my KPI, my key performance indicator is 5. I have 5 new patients a month. And my goal is I'd like to have 5 more new patients a month. I'd love to have 10 new patients a month. And so the goal is 10, and that's the goal or objective. And then you have to answer for yourself, what are the tools? What are the behaviors? What are the things you're willing to do as a team to drive more new patients? Because it's not going to just happen because you wish it. And so you say, well, what are the key behavioral indicators? What are the things you're going to change? And so maybe you've decided to place an ad. And then you could also budget for what that would cost. Or you're going to do radio spots. Or you're going to talk at the local schools. Or fill in the blank. My favorite, because it's very inexpensive and extremely effective, is what if we just asked more of our existing patients for referrals? And if we did that just once or twice a day and identified somebody in the huddle in the morning, we could drive by asking existing patients who we like for referrals, we could drive our new patient flow north and really not even spend any money. Maybe we put in a reward program or do something nice when they send a referral, but that wouldn't be mandatory. That'd be pretty good. So those are the kind of things we want to put in these boxes. What could we measure now about hygiene retention? What kind of goal could we have to improve that? What's reasonable? What things would we be willing to do to change that? And by gosh, what would that cost us? That's going to be also an important component of it. Same thing for case acceptance, same thing for new patient flow. And we can look at each one of those differently and get some ideas about where they're going. Well, when we think about the first one, hygiene retention, it's a fairly simple objective. We have patients who come in to get their teeth cleaned, and of course, periodically they come back to get their teeth cleaned. And let's make it very simple now. Just, we won't get into little idiosyncrasies. You can do that later on your own, but let's assume everyone in your practice just needs their teeth cleaned twice a year. We'll forget about all the perio maintenance right now, just to keep it simple. So everybody needs their teeth cleaned twice a year. And so what we know is any patient you saw last year who got their teeth cleaned should still be a patient in your practice this year. That would be retention. And if somebody got their teeth cleaned last year and hasn't been in to get their teeth cleaned this year, that would be a person that you haven't retained well. And maybe you decide that that you want to look at that on a 6-month basis. Man, that'd be tough because sometimes it does go 7 or 8 or 9 months. You might want to look at it at 9 or 10 or 12 months. 12 months is a pretty good metric, but it's a little tough still. You might say, yeah, people do cycle in and cycle out, so 18 months at the worst. So you could look at your active patient population 18 months ago compared to who you see in hygiene now, and you could really look at patient retention. And that would be a very good, very critical way to look at it. Well, if we took a look at the whole hygiene process and said what happens with that, there are a lot of different things that we can do that impact when we look at the process map or what the process looks like for a hygiene visit. And it turns out that we've got an hour, so I'd love to spend 2 or 3 hours just talking about supercharging hygiene, but I'm going to cut to the chase on some of this. There's a lot of stuff we do when a patient comes in or have the opportunity to do that'll impact how many of those patients come back in 6 months. But by far, the single most important thing is that patient should leave with a next hygiene appointment. If that patient leaves and we're going to call them or send them a card or they're going to call us, those are the patients that start to drift away and fall through the cracks. And so the goal, the objective should always be to have as many of those patients leave with the next hygiene appointment. The other things on the list, confirming them, building value while they're in the chair today, knowing something about them and celebrating, using the intraoral camera to show them some areas of health or disease and make notes that we're going to track that over time, all have an impact as well. But if I were to pick one behavior to change, one behavior to measure that would impact my hygiene retention and the number of patients I'm going to see in the hygiene chair in 6 months, it would be making sure every patient leaves the next hygiene appointment. Sounds simple. Many of you are probably sitting back, as many of the dentists and teams I've worked with, saying to yourselves, we've got that one. We do that. We've got it in spades. Well, I've got to tell you a story. I've got a friend that actually near me that we were going to do some work with. And as we were having this conversation about hygiene retention, I remember him saying to me that they're killing it on that. They're doing super. They've got that. Every patient, he said, leaves with a next hygiene appointment, every single one. And I said, well, actually, Dave, that's pretty much impossible. Nobody's really 100%. He said, no, we're 100%. 100% of our patients leave with the next hygiene appointment. That's, well, I got to be honest with you, that really doesn't happen. And so, Dave, I put my wallet on the counter. There was a nice fresh $100 bill showing on the outside. And I said, I don't have $1,000 in my wallet, but I'll make this pledge. If you're willing to put up $1 and we go and measure your next hygiene efficiency, I'll give you $1,000 if it's 100%. He looked at me kind of serious. We were sipping a glass of wine, and he said, well, I mean, not 100%, it might be like 98% or 97%, 99%, but really close to 100. And I pushed the wallet closer to him. I said, Dave, if it's 90% and you're willing to put up $1 in this wager, I'll give you $100 if it's 90% or north. He said, you sound really sure of yourself. I go, I am 100% sure of myself. So he went back and measured it, and it was 72, which is right around the national average. In the average dental practice, doing an average job of making sure that every patient leaves with the next hygiene appointment, it's 70% of the time the patient leaves with a time and date specific appointment. Now, we often think it's really good, and we think we're doing a great job because the schedule is full. But I had a friend who was seeing 15 new patients a month. His schedule is full, and I had to remind him that if his schedule is full, he's losing 15 patients a month that he does not know about if his schedule isn't fuller in 6 months. Because at 15 patients a month times 12 months, that's 180. If they were all adults, they're not, but let's pretend they are for a second. And they all got a 1 hour cleaning twice a year. That'd be 360 more hours of hygiene that should be in that practice the next year than the current year. Let me say that again. 15 patients a month times 12 is 180. If they got their teeth cleaned twice a year, that'd be 360 hours of hygiene that I should add to the schedule year after year, year over year, if my hygiene retention was 100%. And nobody's is 100%. But even if that was only supposed to be half, 15 patients times 12 months, 180, 360 hours of hygiene divided by 8 hours a day is 45 full days of hygiene. So that friend of mine's practice should have been growing by a full day of hygiene year over year if his retention was 100%. So see, these are metrics we don't normally look at or track or think about in practice, and we can fall into a real sense of comfort when we look and we see that the schedule is full. That's great. I want you to have a full schedule. But if we're seeing 15 patients a month, that schedule should be growing. We should be adding half days or 3/4 days of hygiene year over year. So the key metric here is to measure how many patients leaving the next hygiene appointment. And the best way to do that is to look back. We're in the middle of a month right now. So if you look back at the previous month and look at the first day of the month and look to see how many patients come in on that first day of the month to get their teeth cleaned. And if it was 10, put 10 check marks on the left-hand side of the piece of paper. Then look each one of them up in the computer and see if they have a time and date specific appointment. And if they do, put a tick mark on the right-hand side. And if they don't, leave it blank. Do that till you get 100 tick marks on the left, 100 patients who come in, however long it takes. And put tick marks on the right-hand side if those patients have a hygiene appointment. When you get done with 100 on the left, stop, count the right. That's the percentage of patients leaving out of 100 with the next hygiene appointment. Here's the good news. If it's 90, I'll give you $100. No, I won't give you $100 because we're not in a wagering situation. But if it is 90 or north of 90, take your team out to lunch and tell them what a fantastic job they're doing. 92.46, that's about as good as we can get. I have seen 100 go for a week or a month, but it's really not sustainable. But anywhere in the 90s, just celebrate. Do not try to drive that number up. Just celebrate. But if it is 70, which is the average, and you had 5 full days of hygiene in your practice, you had one full-time hygienist and somebody else part-time 1 day a week, and they all saw 6 hours with adults and 2 hours with the kids, they could see up to about 10 patients a day. So if you had 5 days of hygiene, that'd be 50 patients a week. And a 20% delta from 70% next hygiene visits to 90%, a 20% delta would be 10 more additional appointments in the schedule 6 months from now. That's 10 more appointments you don't have to chase down, call, cajole, go into the dead files, or do something to try and fill the schedule when it gets here. And you'll find this increased efficiency fills and expands your hygiene schedule right away. And whatever a day of hygiene is worth, if you had 10 patients and your average hygiene fee was $150 or it was $200, so you're talking here about $1,500 to $2,000 per day. On an annualized basis, that's $75,000 to $100,000. But that doesn't stop there, because sometimes those hygiene patients need to have some dentistry done. And when you find a broken down restoration or crown that needs replacing or something like that, that increases the total net revenue from that process of having more of those hygiene patients in your schedule. Turns out in most practices, the ratio is about 1 part hygiene to every 2 or 3 parts of dentistry. So it's about 25 to 35% hygiene in a practice. So for every $1 of hygiene revenue we found, there's probably $2 to $3 worth of restorative revenue. So if we found $75,000 to $100,000 worth of hygiene revenue in this example of moving it from 70 to 90%, there should be another $150,000 to $200,000 of restorative revenue that would come along with that. This is probably in the vast number of practices, the single best low-hanging fruit from a behavioral change standpoint that we could do to drive practice growth, is making sure that we do a better job of making sure that everybody leaves the next hygiene appointment. Now, just to tell you how we aren't very good at strategic planning for business sometimes. I actually have had, now it's 3 dentists over the years when I describe this say to me, whoa, if we did that, we'd have a lot more cancellations. If we were that much busier, we'd have more cancellations. And I have to admit, that would be true. If you had a 5% cancellation rate and you booked an extra day of hygiene every week, you'd have a 1/2 of a cancellation every week, or 25 more on the year. But you would also have those other 9.5 patients in the chair getting their teeth cleaned that you wouldn't have had if you weren't driving that behavioral change. So don't focus on the 1 or 2 little red marks on the piece of paper. Focus on the green marks on the paper, the people that are in the chair, the people that you got right on the test. That's a far better way of looking at that. If you go, gosh, we couldn't fill a whole day, somebody didn't show up, we had a 10% loss rate, but you still had 9 patients that did show up. So that's a very, very robust change in a practice, no question about that. So that's hygiene retention, and that's a pretty good opportunity. And the good news is we're going to talk about 3 different behaviors that we can play with today, so that if you should go and measure hygiene retention and it is spectacular, then you've got a couple of things you can play with. The next thing we can talk about is case acceptance, and making sure that patients are given the opportunity by, as we develop a curiosity and a co-discovering kind of examination experience for patients when they come in, let them learn about their mouths. We think about the learning ladder and all the different things we could talk about, listening skills, fantastic stuff that we can do to really create an experience for patients that makes a higher probability for us of that patient saying yes to the treatment plan that we present. It's probably never going to be 100%, but we don't really need to change everyone or get everyone to say yes. I mean, my goodness, if we just had 1 more patient a week saying yes to needing something as simple as a crown, and it were $1,200 or $1,500 for that crown, and there's 50 weeks in a year, that's another $75,000 in production. So if the single lowest hanging opportunity of fruit was hygiene retention, case acceptance, and getting yes to just 1 more crown a week is $75,000 in difference in terms of production for a practice. Now, and that wouldn't work really well if you were totally full in your schedule and didn't have any more room to put anybody. But most of us have the occasional cancellation. Most of us have, at the end of a week, 5 or 10 or 15% vacancy rate in the time that we have available to see patients. And so having those kinds of opportunities to refill that schedule is robust when we think about the cost of fixed overhead versus variable expense and all that. So let's take a look at case acceptance and what that looks like. If we were to look at case acceptance, and you saw a little bit of this in a mapping process that we had on the previous one. So this is kind of a loose version of what we would call a process map in manufacturing or in service businesses. What are the processes? What are the steps? What are the sequencing that a patient goes through? Well, we see the new patient, we do an examination, and we come up with a diagnosis. We present the treatment. They either accept it or they don't. They either appoint or they don't. We either bill them or we don't. I hope they do. And we either collect from them or we don't. And so there are various things. It's important that the patient understand the role of insurance and that it's not insurance, that it's insurance is defined as a third party taking a risk for a catastrophic loss, and there's nothing catastrophic about $1,200. From a billing perspective, it's nice to have options for the patient, whether it's care credit or payment plans or anything else like that. And certainly helping the patient develop a sense of value that the same patient who comes in and lays their Louis Vuitton handbag on the counter, puts their Lexus keys down, and you can see their address on their chart, and it's a neighborhood that you can't afford to live in, yet they only want to do what's covered by insurance, or they only want to do that one tooth and not do more. Those are patients that we really have not given the opportunity to understand their own mouths, their own conditions, and haven't developed that sense of curiosity and that sense of them figuring it out or co-discovering with us. That's really kind of a fun exercise to do with patients. And then certainly making sure that when we're going through that we ask more questions rather than telling them what they need. It's so easy for us to fall into that trap of doing an exam, gathering information, and then coming right back with that flip side of the equation. Say, well, I've done the exam, and here's what you need. You need this, 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 and this. To which the patient often says, does my insurance cover it? And I always like to think of it as, I don't want to tell the patient what they need. until they clearly demonstrate to me that they want something, that they want to know the answers, that they own those problems. We talk about patient education. We talk about getting patients to want what we know they need. Well, how the heck do we do that? Well, I want to, again, trying to keep it simple tonight with a simple strategic plan and 3 different behaviors that we could decide to jump onto to play with in that matrix that we had filled out. I want to talk about using a really strong educational tool called the intraoral camera. The intraoral camera is a neat tool because so many people are visual learners. About 65% of everybody are truly visual learners. So seeing something is believing for them. Seeing something can be a sense of ownership for them. And seeing something could be a real path to understanding something for them. The other people who learn experientially or learn auditory, reading, there's often a visual component to their learning as well. So even non-pure visual learners usually still have a strong visual component to how they gather the information, even if it still requires experience for them, or it still requires that they read more about it. There's still a visuality to that when they're gathering their information. So the visualization of what's happening in a patient's mouth can be very, very telling. So I like to lean in on how often, how well, and what for we use the intraoral camera when we think about case acceptance. And I'm oversimplifying here, but if we took 100 practices who were using the intraoral camera once a day, and we got them to use it twice a day, in that practice, doing nothing else but just using the intraoral camera and terrible, terrible, terrible communication skills, whatever they had before, no improvement, they'd have more patients say yes to the dentistry. If they showed more patients situations that were happening in the mouth and did not become better communicators, but just showed them pictures, ask them what they saw, ask them what they thought, more of those patients would say yes. Now, not a lot more, not as many as you could maybe have say yes to treatment plans and restorative solutions that you have, but the more effective we can become with a tool like the intraoral camera from a patient education, ownership, curiosity, co-discovery kind of thing, the more effective we'll be at people owning those problems. Remember, I didn't say we needed to find 100 patients a month that were going to say yes to these comprehensive care situations that we love to treat. One more Corona week, maybe one more big case a quarter that gets excited because they really own and understand things. They really learned it because of the time you spent and the way they could see it on a 24 or 36-inch screen. So it's fun to take the intraoral camera, and I'll use an example to be quick here because we've got the constraints of an hour. But it'd be fun to take an intraoral camera and have that take a picture of a tooth, for example, and have this big gnarly-looking tooth on the screen. And instead of saying to the patient, see that tooth up there? It's badly broken down. That tooth needs a crown. And some degree, some percentage, some amount of your population of patients, when you tell them that they need a crown because you've shown them this picture, or maybe if you had them hold a hand mirror and you told them that, or somehow you just looked into their mouth, didn't show them anything, you told them, some percentage of those patients will say yes. Now, all I'm talking about is trying to get a few more of those patients to say yes. So if I take that picture and I put it up on the screen, instead of saying you have and you need, I said, well, what do you think about that? Well, let's not talk about good patients, because a good patient would look at that and a good patient would say, oh my gosh, that looks horrible. What are we going to do to fix it? That's a patient that's running up that learning ladder we talked about, that learning ladder where they go from unaware to aware to interested or to believing or trusting in you, and to finally asking that commitment question that leads to action. What do you think we should do? You become their trusted advisor for that moment, and they want your opinion. And you'll, again, sales term, I apologize, you'll close more of those people into whatever the treatment plan is if they've come up that learning ladder and they're curious and they figure it out with you instead of you just telling them. So if I have that up on the screen, I say, so what do you think? And good patients run up the learning ladder. With bad patients, maybe look away. And so I make sure they're looking at the camera and say, well, what do you see right there? And they say, I don't know, what do you see? And I say, I asked you first. I'll say, what do you see right up there? And I'll say, I don't know, that's my tooth. And I go, yeah, what do you see right here on this side? And I point to one part of the tooth on the lingual or the buccal, this gnarly looking big MODB amalgam. And they say, well, that's my tooth again. I go, yeah, that's actually a part of your tooth called the enamel. I go, okay. I go, do you know why they call it the enamel? I'm going to continue to ask questions. I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to continue to ask questions. I'm going to stay in the questions, stay in the problem. That's enamel. Do you know why they call it that? No, because it's the hardest material on the body. It's even harder than bone. And it's really an important outer layer of the tooth that protects everything else that's going on the inside. So what do you see over here on the other side? And I point to the lingual, and they say, that's that enamel stuff again. I go, exactly, excellent. And what about in between? Well, that's a filling. What kind of a filling? Keep asking questions. Keep the conversation going. Make them, let them, allow them, facilitate them to learn about what's happening in their mouth. So what do you see in between? It's a filling. What kind of a filling? A silver filling. And what do you see here between the silver filling and the tooth? Well, there's a little space there. I go, yeah, that's a little area where there's some decay. Some of the filling is decayed out or chipped out, broken out, and that's breaking down there. You can see that. I go, yeah, you see that now. And so what do you think's at the bottom of that crevice? Oh, I don't know. I go, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? I actually do say that sometimes. And I say, because, you know, you just got through getting your teeth cleaned, and Linda did a great job of getting in there and cleaning everything out, but she can't get down in that little crevice. And so if you had waffles this morning for breakfast, those waffles are down in that crevice, and the bacteria and germs, the plaque that live in our mouths all the time, they love carbohydrates, and they take those and they poop out acid. And that acid is going to continue to eat away at the tooth until more of that tooth breaks, and you'll end up, I don't say you'll end up needing a crown or end up losing your tooth. That doesn't scare anybody. Good verbal skills will have you find their hot button. And for a lot of people, if you finish the sentence with the word root canal, you'll get their attention. So I like to say, till eventually that tooth breaks down more and you'll end up needing a root canal. And they don't want a root canal. Pat them on the back right then and start to leave the room. They're going to go, hey, wait a minute. What are we going to do about that tooth? Exactly. See, I wanted that patient who was playing hard to get. I wanted that patient who acted like they didn't care, because that patient in their mind is saying, this doesn't hurt. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I tell them, it is broke. It just doesn't hurt. That's different. If you had a tumor, if you had high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease, would you want me to treat the cardiovascular disease? You want me to wait till it's 90% blockage of your coronary artery? Or you want me to find out when it's 10 or 15 or 20% and do something about it? You want to catch the tumor when it's 1 centimeter? You want to wait till it's 8 or 10? Well, you want to catch it early, yeah, before it hurts. See, absence of pain does not mean health. Absence of pain means you don't have any pain. Absence of disease means it ain't broke. And that tooth is broke. It just doesn't hurt yet. It's gonna. We're just gonna wait. And you know, for all I know, you could come in 6 months and it could be feeling fine and holding on, but eventually that tooth's gonna break and you're gonna end up needing a root canal. So finally the patient says, well, what can we do about that? And you go, well, thank you for asking. Don't say it needs a crown. If that patient played that hard to get, play hard to get back with them. So honestly, Mr. Jones, before I tell you what we could do for that, I'd have to ask you a couple questions because I need some more information. Let me ask you a couple questions. Number one, if we go to fix that tooth, there's a lot of different techniques and materials we can use. Would you want us to do that in such a way that it's going to last several years? Or would you want us to do it in a way that maybe, if you're lucky, would even last the rest of your lifetime? Most patients, not everybody, but most patients would choose lifetime. You go, great. And then we have tooth-colored materials, we have silver metal materials, and we have gold metal materials. Do you have a preference there? And most patients would choose tooth-colored materials. I go, great. But when a patient says tooth-colored, and I'd like to get a shot at maybe this lasts the rest of my lifetime, they didn't pick a filling. That's a ceramic crown. But you never said ceramic crown. You never talked about what they need. You asked them what they wanted. What a different approach. See, people have money for what they want. And so if, instead of selling you the thing and telling you that you need the thing, if instead I ask you what features, advantages, and benefits of the different things that are out there would you prefer? What do you want? You might pick what I was going to tell you you need. And it's very likely you will, because now you're understanding the value, the benefit, the advantages of different restorative procedures. Excuse me. So that's how we might use the intraoral camera. And you could do the same thing if you were talking about wear and a patient that needed a bite splint, airway, somebody with periodontal disease, somebody with a full mouth reconstruction, possibility of implants versus partials. There's no limit to how you'd apply and use the intraoral camera as a communication tool, putting this picture of what you wanted them to be able to visualize right up in front of them where they can see it. Sometimes it's helpful to have healthy on one side of the screen and their situation or your concern on the other. Sometimes it's healthy to have a results-oriented picture up there so they can picture and envision the before and the after, and maybe something with the intermediary steps. used to love to show patients who had complex anterior restorative cases how wonderful the provisionals could look. Sometimes their quiet worry is, well, how do I look for 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 weeks while I'm getting this done? Am I going to not be able to smile, go to work, cover my mouth? Especially, think back to your social styles, especially an expressive person who'd be very concerned with how they look. No need to address that kind of need. All right, so now we've covered off a couple of different things. We've talked about hygiene retention and case acceptance. Now let's go talk a little bit about new patients. It's interesting when we think about new patients. Most of the time, if I were to say to a practice, how's it going? They say, well, not as busy as you'd like to be. I said, what do you think the problem is? Most of the time they'd say, I need more new patients. Well, you heard with that one friend of mine, not Dave, the other one, his name was actually Jim, but you heard a friend of mine, Jim, who said he had 15 new patients a month. And yet he really wasn't as busy as he wanted to be. Well, his problem was not having enough new patients. His problem was hygiene retention. And so sometimes fixing the hygiene retention problem means you have plenty of new patients. I remember when I was practicing full time, seeing 4 or 5, 6 at the most new patients in a month. That is literally all I could handle. If I had 8 or 10 or 12 new patients a month, which we occasionally would have for unusual reasons have that happen, I didn't know where to put them. Those were 1.5 hour, 2 hour appointments. They weren't terribly productive from a financial standpoint. They would be down the road. If half those patients needed significant dentistry done and said yes, I wouldn't have had a place to put them in my schedule. I was moving along at a good pace. Now, when I got ready to bring in an associate, oh my gosh, flood me with those folks. Of course, that's a different situation. But when I was humming along, too many new patients can be a problem as well. You just don't get to spend the quality time with them. And I've worked with some practices that suffer with that kind of a problem versus not being as busy as they want. Well, if you do want to have more of the right kinds of new patients, one of the things you can do is make sure that you drive great referrals. There's lots of opportunities that we could talk about. I'll focus on one behavior again tonight in each of these categories. You could drop hints on the phone. Thank you for calling. How'd you hear about our office? Oh, Mrs. Jones. Oh, yeah, Mrs. Jones is great. She sent lots of patients. In fact, that's how most of the patients find our practices. Referrals, like Mrs. Jones did with you, dropping a hint that this patient too could refer down the road. You could do things when they arrive and how you hand them off in the patient, give them a tour of the office and show them, maybe your brag wall where some cards and letters and notes come in. You could talk about things during the preclinical interview that remind them that if they should choose to invite their friends and their family to come in. There's things about the clinical exam. And then just this last week, I was talking with somebody in a practice, and they reminded me how important the post-clinical kind of conversation is. In other words, we've had this treatment plan that's kind of significant. We've gotten everything done. What a great opportunity to have a post-treatment consultation with that patient and say, I just wanted to sit down. We did a lot of work for you, and we kind of recount how it all went, how we all came to make these decisions, and the ups and the downs. And it's a great opportunity when you get done, depending on your comfort level, of how you could ask that patient to maybe replace themselves in your practice with somebody else that would have the opportunity to have the kind of dentistry that they had done. But once again, keeping it simple tonight, the single most important thing you can do to get more of the right kinds of referrals, great new patients, is to ask your existing great patients to refer in their friends. This always is one of the hardest conversations for people to get comfortable having. But if you try it, not once or 3 times, if you try it 5 or 10 or 15 times, or maybe it's another staff member instead of you, but once you've had that conversation a few times, it will become more. It works great. You can just simply wait for that opportunity where you've been given a compliment, where you can fish for a compliment and say, somebody's getting their teeth clean. How's it going? Teeth comes, everything's going good. By the way, Ms. Jones, we did a lot of work for you. Everything's really good. I really enjoyed working with you, everything like that. Can I ask your help with something? That's how you introduce the question. Can I ask your help with something? And these are patients you like. You identify them in the huddle in the morning. And it's not 10 of them today. It's 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 5 a week. It's not a lot of patients. So can I ask your help with something? And the patients you like, you're going to say, yeah. They, I'm not trying to be the biggest practice here and keep us going forward. In fact, if everyone who lived here decided they want to come here to my practice, I couldn't possibly see them. There's just too many people. So whether I want to or not, I have to be a little selective on who we see and what we do. And what I know is I like to work on patients like you. So the favor I'd ask of you is if you should happen to think of somebody or know somebody that you think would be right for our practice, would you give one of my cards? And you hand them a couple of business cards. Now, when we ask dentists, how does that feel? They go, oh man, I feel like I'm begging. When we ask patients, how did that feel when they heard that conversation? They felt flattered. Man, we have some self-esteem issues. There isn't a salesperson in the world that's even semi-successful that doesn't ask for the business, doesn't ask for a referral. If you don't believe me, go to a dental convention and walk down the line. There is no shortage of people willing to ask you to buy their stuff or refer your friends. Sometimes you're rewarded for it, sometimes you're not. But man, whether we like it or not, we're in sales. Everybody's in sales. And so this opportunity of asking good patients you like for referral of one of their friends or family is a robust opportunity to grow our practice. If you did that for 6 months, you're going to find there'll be an increased tick in new patients the next 6 months. I'm not saying that if you're seeing 10 new patients a month now and you do this 2 or 3 or 5 times a week, that you'll double that to 20. Well, you might just pick up 1 or 2 or 3. And what is a new patient worth? Especially a new patient who's referred in by a great patient, or a new patient who's referred in who maybe needs some significant dentistry done. So that's an excellent way to grow your practice. All right, so I promised you when we got started that we'd give you a simple, easy strategic plan. And this strategic planning matrix is pretty straightforward. It asks you to look at 3 different areas in your practice, and then we've picked 3 different behaviors: the percentage of patients leaving with next hygiene, the use of the intraoral camera, and then the percentage of people that are asked for referrals. And if we set goals and objectives for that, if we find out that our next hygiene was 70% and we set a goal of growing it to 80 for the next few months, and then eventually 85, and then maybe eventually 90, that'd be fantastic. If we took a look and we found that we use the intraoral camera 2 or 3 times a day, and we divided that into the number of patients we saw, and let's say we saw 20 patients, and we used it 2 times, that'd be 10% utilization of the intraoral camera, and trying to work our way up to 20, and then 30, and then 40, then maybe ultimately 50% of the time. And some consultants would say 100% of the patients should have the intraoral camera used, and I'm sure they're pointing out healthy things as well. But I'd love to get a practice 50% of the time using the intraoral camera to educate their patients. And what if we just could go from not asking for referrals to asking, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20? We're talking about 5 or 10% of your practice. It's not a big number of patients to ask. These are really small things we can do to drive change and to drive behavior. So that's what I've got for you tonight. I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for us for questions. Excuse me. I need a cold glass of water or a beer or something, and give myself the opportunity to clear that out just a little bit. So I'm going to open the chat box, and if somebody's got some questions they want to ask, then fire those in there, and I'll be happy to answer those for you in the next 5 or 6 minutes we've got till we finish this one down. Yeah, so I see the first one coming in here now is, so what if you're good on all 3 of these? Well, if you're good on all 3 of these, you'll have to come to another course or another webinar, or coming down to Pankey and look at some of the other categories you saw in those 3 slides that talked about hygiene retention, case acceptance, and new patients. There are other behaviors. I tried to talk tonight about the 3 things that were the easiest to do, the 3 things that were the most impactful to do, that would have the greatest growth and impact on your practice, and those are pretty significant. But yeah, there certainly are other things you can do. There's no question about that. Another question coming. I see a couple more questions popping up. So one on could I repeat what I said about insurance, the definition of insurance? Happy to. What I said was, and we spend a lot of time in our practice making sure that the patients understand that it's not dental insurance. We try not to use the word dental and insurance. And so we'd say, when the patient says, do you take my dental insurance? We'd say, we'll be happy to fill out all the forms about, for your dental benefits or your dental plan or your dental coupon, some people call it, but we never say dental insurance. And I always try to talk to a new patient and say that, you know, it's funny that we got to invent dental insurance. It seems kind of weird. It's like letting the wolf guard the chicken coop. But the thing we really screwed up is it's not really insurance. In fact, if you looked up the definition of insurance in the dictionary, it says when a third party takes the risk for catastrophic loss. And there's nothing catastrophic about $1,200. So that's that statement. Good one coming in here. How do you motivate your hygienist to use those cameras? Well, I think that's a deeper, longer leadership question. I think that if you're celebrating successes and you're doing a fine job of leading people towards appropriate behaviors, they will want to use those intraoral cameras more as a tool to help educate their patients. Certainly, a bad way would be to tell them they have to use them more. Instead, you know, telling stories and inspiring people to want to change their behaviors is a much stronger inducement. I wanted to do a little shout out. I promised somebody I'd say hello. So Michelle Wolf saying hello to you tonight. Jimmy's asking, would I ask the patient referral question again? He got the part about not seeing everyone, but like working on you. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I would make a note in the chart that I asked for a referral, and then maybe 6 months down the road, I'd say, hey, you know, how's it going? Great. Hey, last time when you were in, I asked if you could think of anybody that would be right for our practice. Did anybody come to mind? So I might nudge him a second time, maybe a year later, nudge him again, but I wouldn't certainly beat up on them or anything like that. So yeah, I would nudge him again. That's great, Jim. What about asking for reviews? Yeah, definitely we should ask for reviews again. We covered off 3 tactics, 3 behaviors that we could change, but something like 86% of the patients who hear about your office, even if somebody that you asked referred them in, the first thing they do is Google you, and 66% of those patients are looking for positive Google reviews. There are a lot of good ways to get Google reviews. I've had some practices had really good success by using the Dental Vibe, and they've got a review generating thing. We ask the patients in our practice, and I just do dental sleep medicine now, but in the practice that I sold, I still do some work with them. They actually ask patients to fill out the reviews, check in when they're in Facebook at the office, and then when they go into Google and give the reviews, there's another incentive for them when they are scheduling and confirming their appointments. And then after the appointment, they're sent a review sort of sheet, so they have ample opportunities to do that. Thoughts and ideas for rewarding patients, refer patients? Love that. I think so. I think that that's a nice thing to do. I love the idea of, and you asked this in your question, individual team members when they have success in bringing in referrals. But I would remind everybody that the most significant type of positive reinforcement is intermittent positive reinforcement. Punishment does not work well. Negative reinforcement does not work well as a motivator. But intermittent positive reinforcement, not every time, not some sort of scale where the first time you get $1, the second time you get 2, the third time you get 3, but just having some fun and saying that, you know, trying to individualize the gift that something that they really like. Follow up to that question, the verbiage I used initially. Can I ask you a favor? Can I ask you help with something? And the patient, for a new patient referral, can I ask you help with something? And the patient says, sure. Says, you know, I'm not trying to be the biggest practice here in Key Biscayne, Florida. In fact, if everybody in Key Biscayne came to see me, I couldn't possibly see them. I'd be too busy, be too many people. So whether I like it or not, I have to be a little selective. But I like working on people like you. So the favor I ask is, if you should happen to think of somebody that you think would be right for our practice, would you give one of our cards? So something like that. So thanks for re-asking it. What kind of loyalty or rewards programs you suggest for referrals? I think, again, intermittent. I wouldn't do it all the time. So intermittently, I might go out there and say, could be a dinner gift certificate, Starbucks coupon. But what's probably the most effective is if I know something about you and I know something personally about you. I know you're a golfer. You've told me you're too cheap to buy Pro V1 golf balls. And so if you've sent me a couple of referrals and I say, hey, listen, I really appreciate those referrals and stuff like that. I want you to have these, and I give you a dozen golf balls that cost me $48. And I could have given you a $100 gift coupon because you sent me 2 wonderful patients. That would have cost me twice as much money. But the fact that you wouldn't pay $48 a dozen for these golf balls and I give them to you as a gift is much more impactful emotionally than it would have been if I just given you a monetary gift that was commensurate with the level of what you had done for me. Great questions coming in. I appreciate that. It sounds like there's a lot of good energy, around the conversation we had. So my email, I think it was on the first slide, so hopefully you caught that, is mtmurphy@gmail.com. So that's mtmurphy@gmail.com. So if you've got any other questions or anything else like that, I want to kind of respect the timeline that we've got coming up on 9 o'clock. But feel free to email me, shoot me a question or anything like that. It was great to see some of the names on here of people I know and people I've spent some time with and taught with down at the Institute and taught. So it's really kind of cool. So I really appreciate all that very much. I want to thank you all for tuning into this. You know, we're going to do these probably quarterly. We've got some other good topics to talk about, some other good things. So I look forward to keeping an eye out on the email for the next one. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you the date of it, but I think it's about 3 months from now. So I'm sure you'll get a little something on that. And that's about all I got. Thank you. Somebody's saying great info tonight. Looking forward to more sessions, as am I. So that's awesome. So thank you all very much. Good night. Have a great evening, and talk to you soon. Thanks so much.